St. Louis is famous for introducing the world to gooey butter cake. Now, Bluebell brings to St. Louis and the rest of us gooey butter cake ice cream. A rich combination of cake batter ice cream, a luscious cream cheese swirl, and gooey butter cake pieces. Your taste buds will agree. It's the gateway to the best. Available in pints and half gallons. Look for Bluebell ice cream at your favorite grocer. If you can't find it, ask for it.
Hey, it's Mark Goodman.
And I'm Alan Light.
On today's podcast, Record Store Day founder Carrie Colleton is joining us to discuss the April 20th RSD special releases.
Plus, we'll talk live with our audience, the Sound Up Pod Squad, and find out who still listens to vinyl. And some updates from the Beatles universe.
Oh, good. Sound Up with Mark Goodman and Alan Light, the only music podcast that matters. Get it on Pandora, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hola, mi gente. It's Emily Estefan from Red Table Talk, the Estefan's podcast. These days, everyone's kind of a foodie, and that's cool. You know what else is cool? Pairing your favorite dishes with an ice-cold Coca-Cola. Taco Tuesday and a Coke? Classic. Un sandwich cubano and a Coke? That sounds delicious. Coke adds something special to your comidas favoritas at mealtime or anytime. Open an ice-cold Coca-Cola and make the occasion memorable.
Do you know what the purest source of water actually is? Clouds. Yes, las nubes. And get this, smart water is actually vapor distilled through a process inspired by the clouds. So next time you look up at those puffy little guys, think about smart water and how every drop has a pure, crisp taste that will leave you feeling refreshed. It's my go-to companion when I hit those early morning workouts, and smart water is everything you want from a bottle of water. pH balance and added electrolytes for a crisp, clean taste. So try Smart Water today, the smart way to hydrate. Smart Water, a proud member of the Coca-Cola family.
Hola, this is Rosalind Sanchez from the podcast He Said, Ella Dijo. Did you know Walgreens can help you manage your prescriptions right on your phone? Yes, todo lo que necesitas at your fingertips, like tracking the progress of your orders in real time, knowing the price de tus recetas antes de recogerlas, y si tienes preguntas, there's a pharmacy chat option to text with a pharmacy expert 24 hours a day. Con Walgreens, easing your stress y cuidar de tu salud go hand in hand. Download the Walgreens app y descubre más.
For Know Your Prescription Price, the price isn't final. This is an estimated price based on your insurance coverage.
What's good, y'all? This is Breeze Brewing from the Mighty Juggernauts. And make sure you subscribe and download the podcast, Library Rap, the hip-hop interviews with Tim Einenkel. Hip-hop journalism on the highest level.
Yeah, what's up? It's your boy Joel Ortiz, and I want everybody to make sure that they subscribe and download the podcast, Library Rap, the hip-hop interviews with Tim Einenkel. Yo, Tim, I hope all is well. You my guy. I know these interviews are not interviews, they're actually conversations, and I appreciate them all. Yow.
Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Ice-T. I want you to do something for me. Make sure you download and subscribe Library Rap, the hip-hop interviews with Tim Einenkel. It is fucking official. All right? Stop playing. Download and subscribe. Library Rap, the hip-hop interviews with Tim Einenkel. It's cold.
Things just ain't the same for Asians. They slicing our faces with knives and razors. They stabbing whole families, including the babies. We taunted with racist slurs on a daily basis. Immigration agents put us in cages. Cops throw us on the pavement, face down in bracelets. COVID ain't the most contagious disease. Racism's number one in the hatred it bleeds.
Born has had and continues to have an incredible career. When I first heard him in the late 90s, he debuted before then. Up until now, you can tell he's having fun with his music, but as someone who truly continues to care about his craft and he continues to develop it. He recently teamed up with DJ Cutso on the record Anti, a track raising awareness of the increase in violence against the AAPI community. Lyrics Born, welcome to Library Rap, the hip-hop interviews with Tim Einenkel. Thank you so much for being here, man.
Thank you, man. My pleasure.
So I want to talk about the new single, which I think is powerful and also an incredible track as well. But before we get into that, I want you to, if you could take us back to 1992. I know this is a long time ago. With quantum projects. I mean, I definitely heard you. That was kind of like the first experience I've had listening to you. What was the reason? What was the reason behind establishing this hip hop collective, and what did you all want to kind of get out of it, and what purpose did it have then, and what purpose does it have now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I came from Berkeley, California. I was born in Japan, but eventually we moved to Berkeley, California around the time that I was 5. From the moment I heard hip hop, I was just in love. I know you hear people say it was a life-changing experience, but I mean, clearly in my case, it cleared the path for me for what I was going to do with my life, So in that regard, yeah, I mean, I was absolutely smitten at that moment, and I knew what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. The minute I heard Sugar Hill Gang in the first grade, or the second grade, or whatever that was, I knew I wanted to be a part of it. I knew I just clicked with the culture. I clicked with the music. It was just the mystique of it, the allure, the vibe, just everything about hip hop. I wanted more, and I just wanted to be a part of it. And I wanted to be a participant, So I continued to do so, all throughout my childhood and adolescence. And then in high school, when I started Berkeley High, I was rapping. And as a freshman, I was cutting demos in the basement of a guy. His name is John Watson. His producer name was the Onion Lady, and or Onion. It later got shortened to Onion, and it was called the Onion Lab was the name of his studio. And he was one of the very, very few early guys in the Bay Area, the East Bay Area, that had an actual studio, because his parents lived in an actual house. And they had a basement, and he had equipment, and they didn't mind us all hanging out down there and making noise. And eventually, almost every East Bay local rapper would make their way through the Onion Lab, from, Souls of Mischief to Del the Funky Homo Sapien to Too Short to, Kingpin Roski and Mac Mill. That was kind of my crew. They were my mentors. And then, I started to not do so well, man, at Berkeley High. And so, I left Berkeley High and bounced around to a couple high schools. And eventually, by the grace of God, I got accepted to college at UC Davis up here in Northern California. Where are you located?
New York City.
Okay. So, I got into college at UC Davis, and my freshman year in the dorms, I met Chief XL, and from Black Alicious, but at the time, Black Alicious was called Atomic Legion. They weren't called Black Alicious yet. And he was in a group with Gab, and they had been together as a group since they were in high school, wow, which is pretty wild. Yeah, Black Alicious has been together since high school. It's pretty amazing. So I met Chief XL, and I was like, you know what? I've been listening to the college radio station KDVS, and there's this guy on there named Jeff Chang, DJ Zen. He's got a hip hop show, and it's a real hip hop show. He's playing real shit. When I say real shit, I mean, it's like, he's definitely ahead. He's playing authentic 100% underground hip hop. Which is what we loved. Right. Primarily New York hip hop. Jeff Chang obviously went on to become this award-winning storied author, and he's like, an incredible activist, and he's a talking head now on so many documentaries, But at the time, he was just a college radio DJ and a lobbyist at the Capitol of Sacramento. So, what was happening was I kept calling into his show, in this little farm town in the middle of Northern California, where we felt very isolated culturally, And so this was like a beacon of light in the middle of the desert, this radio station and this radio show. So, I kept winning this contest called Name That Sample. So Jeff would play the hip hop song, the rap song, and then it would be like name that sample. So it would be, they play main source, like just hanging out. And he'd say, "What's the sample?" And I'd call up and I'd be like, "Oh, that's Gwen McCrae, or that's Tenor Saw, Ring the Alarm." You know what I mean? So I kept winning. I kept winning every week. I was the only guy calling in, I think, to be honest. And so he said, "Well, why don't you come down, bring some records," because he realized that what he was doing was rare. And I think he realized that having this guy calling every week who was obviously a maniac aficionado was also rare. So he said, "Well, why don't you come down and, come hang out with me, bring some records, we'll vibe or whatever." So I told Chief XL from Black Alicious, who I had classes with, I was like, let's go down to his radio show. We got invited. So he was like, "All right, cool." So me and X went down to KDVS that night. He had like a midnight to 3 radio show. And he comes out and we go in, and then there's like these 2 white guys in the corner of the room, right? And one of them had like this Sherpa Marlboro Man jacket, and this really beat up like corduroy, I don't know, hat that said either Skull or Copenhagen or something like that. I don't know, man. And I thought they were just 2 frat guys, that were just hanging out in the radio station. Turns out it was Eighth Wonder, who went on to do the original artwork for all the Soulside stuff, and the other guy was DJ Shadow.
Wow.
And so we met. So we all met, and we vibed, and conversations started happening, and X and I started coming back every week. It was the one thing that we were really excited about. And at that time, KDVS had probably the best record library I've ever seen, of any college radio station anywhere in America, Mm-hmm. And, eventually after months of conversations, it was obvious that we were all working on demos separately. And Jeff, because he was a little bit he was a little bit older than us at the time. And when I say older, I mean, I was 17 and he was 20, He was like, "Well, why don't we, we're not really having any luck getting signed to major labels. Why don't we pool our money together and make our own records, Mm-hmm. And our own, I don't think it was records plural. I think is, why don't we put our money together and make our own record, And so we did, we I think X threw in some money from his student loans. I think I got a $200 loan from my stepfather, I think Jeff might have had some grant money. Then Shadow kicked in some money, you know what I mean? And we made that first record in 1990. We recorded it in 1991. I think we recorded it. Jeff was like, "Hey, I know this guy in San Francisco. He's got a studio. He'll give us some studio time if we want to do it there. He'll do us a favor, blah, blah, blah." His name's Dan the Automator. Have you ever heard of him?
Wow.
Right. So we go down. So we record our first record at Dan's studio. Dan was older than us. Dan was probably when I say older, I mean, I was 17. Dan was 24, something like that. You know what I mean? And, he was living with his parents at the time, and he had a little studio built in the basement of his parents' house, And so we recorded it there, and that was the first record. On one side, it was DJ Shadow Entropy, and on the other side, it was Asia Born Send Them. And we called it Soul Sides, SOLE, because we each had the soul side of the record. You know what I mean?
So.
And then that was really the birth of Soul Sides, which later became Quantum, but that's how it started.
Oh. So you record this, this record, right? And then what's for you guys? What was the game plan right after that? I mean, were you trying to borrow more money to record more records, or was it pitching to major labels, or even pitching to local radio stations?
Well, we didn't have a game plan, I mean, we sort of had a game plan. I mean, I don't know that it was really clear, we were just kids, we had no idea what we were doing, I think I thought that we were going to put this record out and get rich, And this basically it was basically a 12-inch single or an EP, and so we had these records all over the country and later on the world, just on consignment. We didn't even have a proper distribution deal or anything like that. It was all sort of like hand to hand, And I think what ended up happening was Shadow ended up getting signed to Moax, which was a small independent British label. And Moax, was putting out a lot of records that were really, really popular at the time, in sort of the trip hop world, And so Moax eventually signed a larger deal with a major label. And thus, I think the way it happened was, started putting out Shadow's records on a major level. You know what I mean? And then just as time went on, though, Soul Sides just kept putting out more and more independent records, because there were so many of us. It was me as Asia Born. There was Black Alicious. There was, Latif and me and Latif together as Latyrix. And so we just kept putting out these albums, like every dollar we made went back into the business, and we just kept reinvesting and just kept putting out these albums. And that's how it happened. And I think we all did want to get signed to major labels because that was the thing back then. It was, being an independent hip hop label back then in the early, mid, and late 90s was very, very rare and unheard of. It wasn't done. The only thing I can think of, it was like, if Elon Musk says, you know what, I'm going to build a car. You know what I'm saying? Like it doesn't happen. Why would that's impossible? There's all these major car companies. How could you even think that would be a success? You know what I'm saying? Like that's sort of how it felt. So that was kind of like that was the climate at that time, was like, there's no way that an independent record label will survive. There's no way that it's even possible, but we did it. We did it.
I remember in like 1998, 99, I started a hip hop radio show in my college, like underground hip hop, right? And I remember your label. I got a lot of stuff from you guys, and definitely played a lot of your music. So awesome. It was definitely really appreciated. And that's one thing and I want to ask you. I interviewed Be Real a few months back, and he talked about his voice, right? And how his, it was something that he had to figure out as an MC.
Right.
And I remember hearing you for the first time on my, playing you on my college radio show, and maybe because I'm an East Coast guy, but your voice like really stood out to me at all times. And I'm curious, did you have to go through stages of trying to find your voice in this music, and in terms of like, did you have to change your flow up a little bit, or did can you talk about your progression of your voice?
Yeah, to be honest, my voice did not really change until I was 23 or 24. Like if you listen to those old Lyrics Born or Asia Born, my voice is really high and raspy. My voice really did not change till right around 22 or 23, and it got a lot deeper, and it wasn't until probably like Balcony Beach, which was like 96 or 97, that my voice actually started to sound different, And when it did, I really embraced it. I really embraced it, and I think. That's something that I think every artist, no matter what genre or medium, has to do, is find their voice. Just, for rappers or vocalists, it's figurative and it's literal. You really have to find your voice, and that never stops. You will continue throughout your career, or at least I continue throughout my career to find new voices, or find new ways to express new ideas and new ways and new perspectives and new ways to approach things vocally. That never ends for me, You read, prepping for this interview and,
listening to past interviews and reading up on you, you could tell that you seem to be someone who absorbs a lot from other artists, in terms of like you're always constantly trying to learn. And so I have to ask you, I interviewed a DJ Shadow a couple of years ago, but what was kind of one of the things that have stood out to you as him as a producer that you kind of continue to use to this day?
I think it's funny. I think with all the producers that I've worked with, you take something away. He talks a lot, which is funny. It's like he's not really a very visible guy as far as the media is concerned, But when you work with him, he talks a lot. Like he really thinks out loud a lot, and that's not really my process. Like I'm more of like, let's just get in, let's feel it, let's do it. You know what I mean? But he likes to discuss, things a lot, and it's just a very different approach. And I think, I would say that I don't know now in retrospect if I consider him a producer in that sense. I think, yes, he has produced music with other artists on it, but I don't consider him a producer in the sense that like you're going to hire him to do your whole album for you. Okay. You know what I mean? So it's a little different working with him. It's like a co-product. It's like working with another artist. Do you know what I mean? It's just different. It's not like it's a different experience, But what I do like about him and what I do like about all the guys in Quantum were that we were so and are so committed to quality. Like that's a really, really huge ethos, part of the ethos, I think, that I carry with me to this day. Like it's really, I don't know that I've ever been able to half-ass something. You know what I mean? Right. So, and I think that was one of the things that really that really bound us together, was this sort of this really, really almost too stringent commitment to quality, almost to where, perfect is the enemy of good. Right. You know what I mean? And I've actually loosened up over the years, I feel like, to my benefit, but I've still maintained that ethos, I believe.
Hola a todos, this is Rosalind Sanchez from the podcast He Said, Ella Dijo. If managing your prescriptions has become way too much, Walgreens has good news. They've got digital tools that can really make a difference. That's right. You can track the progress of your order in real time y no perderás ni un solo minuto de tu día. Plus, you can avoid unexpected costs by getting the price of your prescriptions before you go and pick them up. Y si tienes preguntas, the 24/7 pharmacy chat lets you talk to an expert anytime. Y con toda esa ayuda, you'll feel spontaneous sighs of relief, an emptier schedule, y más tiempo para disfrutar your favorite podcasts, like He Said, Ella Dijo. When you have your prescriptions y las de tu familia bajo control and pharmacy assistance at your hands, puedes respirar con más tranquilidad. Walgreens has what you need. Download the Walgreens app to learn more and discover the tools disponibles para ti.
For Know Your Prescription Price, the price isn't final. This is an estimated price based on your insurance coverage.
TDR is the podcast that busts the echo chamber. The world is dominated by hashtags, tweets, and TikToks. This contributes to the polarization that increasingly defines our shared experience. As a culture, we don't have nuanced conversations about difficult issues anymore.
TDR attempts to bring back that conversation. Freedom of speech or freedom from misinformation. Personal autonomy or collective responsibility. And what's courageous or cringeworthy. We're diverse in thought, not just in color. Always provocative, never pejorative. Controversial, not condescending. The show is for all people, but it doesn't work for everyone. We fight it out, but always hug it out.
If discussing controversial subjects from different points of view bothers you, this isn't your show. But for the curious and open-minded, the people who know we're on a journey even if we may not know the destination, welcome to TDR. Listen to the Diversity Remix on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
I want to switch gears a little bit. You spoke in past interviews how growing up, especially in the States, there was zero images of Asian Americans in print and TV, movies, pop culture, and you talked about how you gravitated towards hip hop culture. So what was it about hip hop that spoke to you as and I guess an Asian American growing up at this time? I mean, what was it versus other music that was out there?
Well, I think it was that, when you're a person of color in America, it's pretty obvious early on that you're on the outside. It was clear to me from like 3 years old that, I'm not the guy here. You know what I mean? There's this sort of sense of that you're a visitor, and I've talked to so many people about that feeling, and it's not just Asians. I think it's most people of color have felt that feeling, in their lifetime, if not throughout their lifetime, unfortunately. So I think, and I think that's why hip hop speaks to so many people who, even if you're not a person of color and you still may feel like you're on the outside, the thing that appealed to me so much was that it was so accessible. It was like when I grew up listening to the radio, watching TV, like you just said, there was zero, maybe 2 or 3 people. And one was like Bruce Lee, of course, right, and maybe Mr. Miyagi, right, Pat, and that's it. That's it. And I don't remember ever, or Mr. Sulu, George Takei. But there was nobody that really, and even to this day, it's very difficult to find accurate images of Asian Americans in pop culture. It's really, really hard. Definitely not as hard as it was, thank God. You know what I mean? But, back then it was like, it was next to impossible. So when you hear hip hop for the first time, you're like, oh, wow. So there is this other way to be, so there is this other lane, this other sort of world that I don't need to take guitar lessons. I don't need to be a rock musician. I don't even need to be an R&B musician. I don't even need to be a musician. Right. Do you know what I mean? And I think to this day, that's one of the things that's so special about hip hop is how accessible it is. Anybody can start rapping. There's no courses offered on it. You don't have to go to Juilliard to become classically trained. You know what I mean? I don't even know if you could go on Craigslist and find somebody to teach you how to rap. I mean, I suppose you could,
YouTube.
But you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like it's one of the few arts that is completely self-taught, to this day. The barrier of entry is super low, so anybody can do it. And I think that's what spoke to me about it. I knew all the words to Rapper's Delight before I even heard the song. Wow. And the reason being is because all the kids on the schoolyard, the second graders and the third graders, were all singing the song, on the schoolyard. And I'm like, what is that? How? And then I just started, and I heard them singing it so much, I just joined in, and it was like a barbershop quartet of everybody singing Rapper's Delight. And then, I don't know, maybe a month or 2, 6 months later, whatever it was, I actually heard the 8-minute song, and I was like, oh, that's what this was. Oh, and I just started singing along the first time I heard it. That's why hip hop is so special. That's why hip hop was so special, because I think it was something that was created organically, by Black people, brown people, people of color. And it just spoke to me, it just spoke to me. And while I didn't see a lot of Asian Americans in the media voicing themselves independently, I did have hip hop doing that for me. You know what I mean? And I think that's why it spoke to me.
Was there any pushback within the hip hop community for, I mean, against you? I mean, in terms of being this, Asian kid trying to rap, like, was there more that you felt, or maybe some unbeknownst pressure that you had to prove yourself a little more than any other, than an African American kid or a brown kid?
Maybe at times, but not really, not amongst my peers. I think people were sometimes surprised to hear that sound coming out of my mouth, but definitely not in the Bay Area so much, because I mean, at that time in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, when I was coming of age in the music, I mean, look at who was there. I mean, I could point to Dan the Automator, Q-Bert, Hieroglyphics, E40, Too Short, Invisible Scratch Pickle. I mean, it was so diverse. It was not really that unusual for me to look how I looked and to be an artist, a hip hop artist coming from the Bay. We all live like 15, 20 minutes from each other. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it was really not that unusual. It wasn't until I became a professional and I started making records and I started touring and I saw some of the things that they were writing about me. And I saw the way that the industry at large, the business, started to perceive me. That's when I started to realize, oh, it's not them that's weird and I'm the one that's normal. I'm the one that's different, and they're the ones that are normal as far as the world is concerned. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it became a challenge when I became a professional. That's when it became difficult, because I was no longer dealing with my peers. I was dealing with people who maybe had never even seen an Asian American in their entire lives, let alone, interacted with one in that space, or in any space in entertainment. It was wild. The shit that I used to see written about me was crazy. It was like, oh wow, he's pretty good for an Oriental. You know what I mean?
Jesus, wow.
Or yeah, I mean, because that word was still in the public lexicon, the American lexicon back then in the early 90s. Right. I mean, it was on its way out, but the Asian guy in the group, we really like him. You know what I mean? He's different. I didn't even, I read shit like, there were things in the press that were like, I didn't even know Asians could rap. And I mean, people would say that with such abandon. It was so normalized for people to be that culturally insensitive,
right.
That it was really a tough time, and I had to battle that for a long time. And now my battles are different now, but I mean, they still exist,
You have music that, I mean, you're very open about your journey, and I want to go to 2015 when you dropped your fourth solo album, Real People.
Yeah,
and the first verse, what I think is incredible listening to it again, right, is that the first verse on the title track is, you're very open again. You talk about your parents and yourself flying over from the States to Japan, from Japan to the States. Your parents getting divorced pretty quickly. Their relationship after the divorce, and you growing up with a single mom. Why in 2015 did you feel it was time to, I guess, kind of reshare yourself with us?
I think because these stories need to be told. And for a good 10-year period, I was the only Asian rapper that had a platform. For a good 10-year period, I was the only Asian American that had my own company, my own distribution, my own soapbox. And it was like, there was a certain point where I was like, oh my God, if I don't make a record this year or next year, there will be nobody that looks like me that will put out an album. Do you know what I mean? It's not, thank God, it's not like that anymore. You know what I mean? But that has been my journey. That has been my challenge. And you know what? These are American stories. These are American stories that need to be told. These are American stories that did not exist in the public, not from an Asian American perspective. Do you understand what I'm saying? Sure, there's plenty of songs out there about divorce and relationships ending and, single mothers, but these stories are not coming from Asian Americans. And I think that's the important distinction that people need to understand, is that, the representation, it really does matter. And these things need to be heard, because, when you're 12% of the population, but 0% of the presence, or 0.1% of the presence on air, whether it be the radio waves, whether it be, film, television, it's very, very difficult, to not participate when you have the means. You know what I mean? When you see that void, when you've lived in that void your entire career, and that's where, people ask me, why do you have this drive? Why do you put out an album every year for the past 25 years? You know what I mean? Like, why is it that you do 100 gigs a year? Why? Because, I've oftentimes felt like, all these things, these moments that other artists take for granted, like, it makes me sick when I see artists, keeping their Grammys on their bathroom floor, or drinking beer out of them, or where's your Grammy? Oh, I don't know. It's somewhere around here. You know what I mean? It's like I say in Don't Quit Your Daydream on Quite a Life. It's like, I hear these dudes throw tantrums. There ain't enough room for more Grammys in my bathroom. Meanwhile, I'm here album after album waiting for an Asian to win one statue. You know what I mean? And these are the things that you grow up, in this business, you just don't take for granted, because I literally had to work a quarter's worth for every nickel that I've ever made, in this game, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. I wouldn't trade it for the world, because I knew at some point it was going to change. I knew that I was rounding the bases for the people that would come after me, and the other reason why, everything I do at this point, it's a legacy play. How can I add on? How can I add on to what I've already done in a meaningful way? How can I add on to what the music community and music history has done in a meaningful way? Where can I insert myself and my talents and my perspective and my art? Where can I insert myself in a way that will have lasting value? That is how I view my career now. I mean, it's almost like quantum, that whole part of my life, those formative years, that was so important for me. But that was a lifetime ago, it feels like. It literally feels like a lifetime ago to me, Like, I haven't talked to Shadow in probably 5 years. Oh, wow. Like Latifah and I still get on the phone, regularly. And, X I probably talk to regularly. But, everything has changed, I'm assuming for them as well, since then. But, it's not a moment I ever take for granted. This life, this existence, this journey, this career, my challenges have been far different than those of my peers, being in this business, far different. It's like, I joke with my wife sometimes. It's like, sometimes I feel like I'm in the 50s, Like, this is as far as Asian American. I mean, it's changing very quickly, but for a long time, I felt like it was like 1955 for me. You know what I mean? Like hopping in the station wagon, playing the Chitlin circuit. You know what I mean? And it was just, with my name in cursive on the side of the door. You know what I mean? It was just my challenges have been far, far different than those of my peers in this game,
I want to turn to the new single with DJ Cutso, Anti. Obviously when when COVID hit, the then President Trump obviously used the slur China virus, right?
Yeah.
When you first heard that, do you remember where you were and what was your immediate reaction?
I mean, I knew we were in for trouble. You know, the minute I heard that, the minute I heard the China virus, Kung flu, I was like, oh, this is going to be bad. You know what I mean? Because I knew what it meant. It meant that it was going to be open season on Asians. Because when you have somebody in the very top seat, in the pinnacle of world leadership, sitting in that seat, saying things that, let's be clear, I mean, if any coach, newscaster, coworker, teacher, parent said those kinds of things publicly, they'd lose their job. Mm-hmm. And they might not get another one.
Right.
They might not get another one. But, you know, when you're in the top seat and you basically shun that responsibility, the responsibility to speak responsibly, you know, and you're essentially using language that's so hurtful and hateful, and you're not cognizant or even, you don't even care about what the repercussions may be, and you're in the top seat, you're basically sanctioning violence, you're sanctioning hatred against this group of people. And you got to understand, by and large, in America, we are not adequately educated about ethnic history in this country. You know, we are not adequately educated about people of color in this country and their experiences, you know, as American history. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so, and we are such a large and diverse group. I mean, I don't expect to hear, I don't even expect most Asians to be able to have conversations about us and our differences as Japanese, Chinese, Korean, Filipino, Hmong, Mien, Vietnamese, Laotian, Tibetan, Nepali, Indian. You know, we're a very broad, complex group. And when you make these statements, Americans, they don't draw any, by and large, the average American doesn't draw any distinction between groups. You know what I mean? And you're basically sanctioning this kind of behavior. And so when I heard that, I knew it was going to be a problem. But, you know, I think, and it's true, you know, the numbers, the hate crimes skyrocketed overnight. They skyrocketed. And as we've seen, people are literally dying.
Yeah.
People are literally dying. And it's scary. But, I want to be clear. I want to be very, very clear about something. This existed before Trump. This anti-Asian violence, you know, sentiment, slurs, hatred. I mean, this is something that I've grown up with. I mean, it's as real to me as breathing air. You know what I mean? Like I've grown up experiencing this. I mean, I was called racial slurs probably every day of my life until I was 20. You know what I mean? And then it kind of went down to maybe every other day, you know. And I still feel it, even as a man in his 40s. You know, I still feel it. And obviously, as you can see, what's happening with our elderly, they're feeling it literally and figuratively in their 60s, 70s, 80s. You know what I mean? So it's definitely increased, I think, in some cities 1,000-fold, you know, the incidents being reported. So that means if there was one incident last year. There was 1,000 this year. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's very serious, you know, and it's like I say in the song, you know, in the third verse when I talk about, you know, during the COVID period, I mean, era, Asians, I mean, we're going through all the same things all the other Americans are going through. You know, am I going to lose my job? Am I going to lose my house? Am I going to get evicted? You know, what kind of toll is this taking on my marriage and my relationships? You know, what kind of toll is this going to take on my mental health? I mean, we have all the, you know, oh, and by the way, there's this thing called Corona. I could pass from that, you know.
Right, yeah.
Then there's the actual disease. But now there's this whole other layer for us. Am I going to get killed if I go out today? Is my 80-year-old mother getting on the bus going to get punched in the face? You know what I mean? Are we going to get taunted when we go to Target to fight over toilet paper? You know what I mean? Are we going to get yelled at on the street? Are we going to get assaulted? You know, there's that whole other layer now that we feel, in addition to all the other things that every other American or person in the world is feeling as it relates to living in the Corona era. You know what I mean? So it's been extremely difficult for us. You know, it's been extremely difficult. And you know, I think that's why this song was absolutely necessary. And frankly, that's why it's gotten the reception it has. That's why you and I are talking today.
Right. My wife's good friend, she's a Chinese American, and she has 2 kids, and she says she's really scared. She lives in New York, but she's really scared to go outside at all times. I mean, she has, you know, mace in her pocket and everything, but she's still nervous to leave the apartment.
Yeah. And I just sit here and I'm like, what a beautiful feeling and existence it must be to not have to experience that.
Right.
You know, it's just like, I don't even know what that feels like. I don't even know, you know, I don't know what it's like to not feel worried about my child right now going back to school. You know, and if school is back in, do I let little man in, or will he get his ass kicked by racist upperclassmen? I don't even know what that feels like to not feel that way, you know. And it makes you, it really gives you pause as an Asian American and a person of color. You know, you really stop and you think about, wow. And to take that even further, I don't know what it's like to not live with those feelings in one way or another my entire life. Come to think of it, you know what I mean? So it's like, it's really come to a head for us in our psyche, you know? And it's like I said, you know, in the song, it's like, you know, I know it's been trending, but let's be transparent. This shit's been happening before the pandemic. Coming up, I heard chink so much it was anthemic. You know, that's just true. That's the reality of our existence, you know, in this country, unfortunately. And you know, I just hope this song will alleviate some of that pain for us, you know, and raise the awareness for others, you know.
Lyrics, I want to go back to, there's you talked about education, and there's a line in the song that really stands out to me, and it's those in authority blame the minority. Yeah. And it stood to me because obviously it's a strategy that's always been happening, right? It's just like find someone to blame, find some minority group to blame, and not
absolutely.
And you know, the big thing is you know, Martin Luther King was, you know, organizing sanitation workers and trying to say it's more of a class thing than you know trying to get races together and show that it's so essentially the government is the one to blame and not blacks or whites or, you know, Asians. But I want to ask you about education and what's not taught about the history of Asian Americans being oppressed in this country. Because what's interesting, my daughter's half Japanese and my son's, you know, they're both half Japanese, and my daughter's learning, who's 6, but she's learning about Juneteenth. And she talks about, and it makes sense. She's asked my wife, she goes, so before Juneteenth, was I half black, half white? And what you realize is that what's happening is that you realize, okay, you're somewhat learning about the history of oppression, but of a group, but it's only about, to my daughter's eyes, there's probably was only black people and white people back then, and not Asians or anything. So and of course we have in World War II, Japanese, and the propaganda, the political cartoons that were just out there, and the internment camps. But what do you remember being taught about Asian Americans in school and the treatment of Asian Americans in American history?
Nothing. Nothing. I remember, when I was in school, the American history book, we were reading books back then. The American history book was probably as big as the Yellow Pages. I think we're old enough to remember those eras.
Yes.
And I remember the only mention of Asian Americans was a very small in the entire book was a very small paragraph on the Chinese that came over to build the railroads.
Yep.
I think the thing that we need to be taught and share is that history is a living, breathing entity, and it's changing all the time. And I think, that needs to be reflected in the curriculum, because I learned nothing. And so that where does that put us? It's almost like you're not taught, you're not even shown images that are negative. You're not shown any images.
All right.
You're not reading anything about yourself. So in effect, what that tells you is that you're just non-existent. You don't, subconsciously, the way that that's interpreted is you don't exist, important enough to even be written about. You're of no consequence whatsoever. And again, this is something that we live with. This is something that we live with. And imagine going through 22 years, including higher education, of that, until you're able to if you're lucky enough to make it to college, and take an Asian American studies class for 1 year, or you have the wherewithal and the desire, and you feel the impetus to kind of go research it on your own, And that's why hip hop was so important for me, because I grew up in the Boogie Down Productions Public Enemy era, And, KRS-One, Boogie Down Productions, had a song called "You Must Learn." Do you remember that? Song? And I was fortunate enough to grow up in the era where we had the Native Tongues and the Jungle Brothers and Brand Nubian and Public Enemy, and there was this sort of this black consciousness that was present in the music. Afrocentricity was present in the music at that time. You know what I mean? And what that really stimulated me to do is go out and learn about myself. Oh, yeah, I must learn. I must learn about myself. So I took my ass to the fucking library, and I tried to find everything I could on Asian Americans. And there wasn't much, there just wasn't a lot at that time. There was no Google, obviously, and there was no, I'm here with a library card checking out books, But that's not the norm. That's not what normal kids do in the 9th grade. You know what I mean? That's not the norm. But it was because the music, I was so, the culture and the music was so embedded in me. I did everything that it said. I laced my shoes a certain way. I wore my pants a certain way. I got a certain kind of haircut. I ate a certain kind of food. You know what I mean? I used a certain slang. I carried myself a certain way. I chose the friends that I chose. I chose the spouse that I chose. I chose the career that I did because of hip hop. You know what I mean? And, that is one such example. I really, it made me do a deep dive into who I was, because clearly I was not being taught in the way that other kids were. And again, that's not an Asian American thing. That's a person of color thing. And the thing that's so sad about that also is that we're just depriving ourselves. I don't know if you read this open letter to the music industry that I wrote the other day, but
oh no, I got.
It's on idobi.com, IDOBI. But, that we're just depriving ourselves of the truth of who we really are as a culture and as a society when we don't educate ourselves and teach each other or make space for these stories and these experiences, and it's hard. It's hard to educate your children about who their heroes are when you yourself don't even know. You know what I mean? It's hard for me, like, my wife's Filipino. My son is obviously half Japanese, half Filipino. And it's like, I make it a point. Sometimes I have to do research to educate him on who Yuri Kochiyama is, or who Larry Itliong is, or who Malcolm X is. I have to do, because I don't want them to grow up not knowing the beauty of who they are. It's really important for their self-esteem, because, every time there's an Asian joke made in Family Guy, or every time there's an Asian joke made on The Simpsons, there's no Asian voice to counterbalance that. And my son loves those shows. You know what I mean? Right. And so it's like we had to have that discussion the other day. It's like, these are the things that, as a parent of color, you have to be really vigilant about. Again, it's just that extra blanket on the bed all the time, and it's like when I was talking about our experience during COVID, and we have to, like I said, we have to worry about all the things that all Americans do in this era, but then we also have to worry about this other, we also have this other layer or two on the bed, of the potential for violence or death, and that's sort of our burden as parents of color also sometimes, is that we have to provide this other stream of knowledge. You know what I mean? So that we have a good sense of who we are in the world. Because unfortunately, current modern, quote unquote, modern education doesn't provide that for us.
The entire song, the lyrics are not just powerful, but they're extremely heavy, and it's. It's that weird feeling as a fan that you want to, of course, enjoy the music, but then it gets very, after if you actually read the lyrics and listen to what you're saying, it gets really depressing. And I think what the depression starts off right off the bat with, your opening line, right? And I think just ain't the same for Asians. They're slicing our faces with knives and razors, stabbing whole families, including the babies. We're taunted with racist slurs on a daily basis. And continue, and I won't try to butcher any more of this.
That was very good, by the way.
All right, thank you. I can't. I know. I joke that I could never write a lyric to save my life. But as for you, how tough is it to? I don't know. I mean, emotionally tough is it to write? You always think it. You always know it. You always know that what you're saying is truth, right? But when you put it to the pen to pad, right, it becomes more real.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you combat your emotions when you're writing something like this?
I try not to, I mean, I think the whole purpose really, in my experience, the best songs come when you're able to just open the door, and let the song write itself, and I know I'm not doing my job as well as I could be if I'm getting in the way of that, and I'm not saying I don't edit, but I try not to edit the feeling. I try not to guide the feeling too much. And, to be honest, this song was with Cutso. This song was conceived, written, produced, recorded, mixed, video shot, uploaded, donation campaign launched, $5,000 raised in 10 days flat, and I mean, and I say all that to say, unfortunately, songs like this are really easy to write. They're really easy to write. And unfortunately, why? I don't have to dig deep. You know, it's like I said, I mean, this is something that I've lived with my entire life. You know, I'm very acquainted with these feelings. I'm very acquainted with this experience and these sentiments, you know, because, you know, when you grow up, like, you know, as an Asian American, as a person of color, you, as much as you try to bury it, it's there, you know, and, you know, it's just something that, I'm very familiar with, you know, so it's not like I have, sadly, there's a wealth of material here. You know, if that makes sense, you know what I mean? And, you know, I knew it was going to be heavy, but the situation was heavy, you know, and it was more important to me that it was on the table. And how it's received, hey, you know, I don't have control over it. Just like any other song that I write in that regard, I don't have control over how it's received, you know. I just have to make sure that the intention is pure and that I'm speaking my truth and that you can't say you weren't told.
You know, I saw Murs recently, he dropped a verse on a track produced by Kato, calling for the end of Asian hate as well. What has the response been from the hip hop community to your track, but also call against Asian hate? Oh,
it's been crazy. I mean, it's, you know, it's about as close to going viral as you can go without going viral. Because the algorithms have changed, you know, like it's about as close to going viral. I mean, you know, I'm sitting here speaking to you, right? Which is, I mean, this is the most probably I've ever talked in an interview, to be honest. You know, I mean, the response has been everything from NBC News to NPR to Sirius XM to, you know, the local paper to blogs to, I mean, it's nuts. It's nuts. And I think it's because you cannot unsee these images now, you know, and the truth is I could have made this song, Cutso and I could have made this song 10 years ago and it would have been just as relevant within our community. It would have been just as relevant. But now it's like, unfortunately, the world is doing its marketing for us. You know, you see all these images that substantiate what we're talking about, that corroborate what we're talking about. You know, we've all heard the ex-president say those words. You know, you see the images caught on tape of the people being assaulted and, you know, it's inescapable. You know, like a couple friends of mine, a really good friend of mine, my old college roommate, he called me up. He's like, "Hey man, when did all this anti-Asian violence start?" You know, and I was like, 200 years ago. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
And he was like, "Oh," and as soon as I said that, he knew exactly what I meant. What it meant was it's been going on for a long time. It's only now that it's in the public consciousness in such an obvious way, you know? And, you know, I think that if I were to go tomorrow, you know, I have these feelings from time to time where, you know, there was a point in my career when I was touring so much. You know, I was on the road most of every year, you know, and I was on literally a flight. I think I counted one time. I was on a flight a day for 30 days straight, you know.
Holy wow.
And I started to develop a fear of flying, you know what I mean? I'm like, I'm flying this much, my odds are not good, You know what I mean?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And so I'm up in the air and I'm just like, God, please let me make it through this flight. I have one more album to make. Please let me just finish this album. I just remember feeling that way. And, at this point, I've got 15 albums done. I've got a catalog of 25 titles, but I have this song. And, this is the song that, I want my son to be able to point to this song and be like, my dad was a real one. He said it. He fucking said it. You know what I mean? And, he made some great albums. Yeah. He won some awards. Yeah. He made a little money. You know what I mean? But he said it. He fucking said it. You know what I mean? And that to me is incredibly important, because once I've said it, I can't unsay it. And once you hear it, you can't unhear it. You know what I mean?
Right. If your son hears a song and then says to you or asks you, Dad, what do you think your most powerful line or powerful verse on this song is? Which one would you point to? He's not really, I don't think he's really old enough to sort of comprehend all the nuance. You know what I mean? Right.
But that's a great question, man. I'd have to think, you stumped me. I don't have an answer. I think overall, like I said, I think the fact that it was made, but he and I, we have conversations about this kind of stuff all the time, and that's what I think is beautiful, is because I did not have these conversations with my parents growing up. You know what I mean? And we have these kind of conversations all the time. Like we'll watch things in the news and, we'll have to, not often because he's just not old enough, like I said, to sort of comprehend nuance and so forth. But, we do have very critical conversations about things that we observe or see, or because I want him to be able to grow up to be able to think critically about these things, and to develop his own perspective and sort of have a broader sense of himself, and where he and how and where he exists in the world. You know what I mean? And how we show up in the world is entirely based on our experience, and how we feel about ourselves, and I keep all these posters and records and memorabilia from my career, and they're all around the house. And his mother, all her stuff, it's all around everywhere because you're not going to see these images of people that look like you and last names that end in vowels. You're not going to see these images out in the world, so it's important that when you're at home, you feel reinforced and emboldened, and you see what your possibilities are in life, like I said, all those things are very important, and again, this is, my challenges are different than that of my peers. My challenges are different than that of my peers. And that's something that I've had to embrace, and that I do embrace, and I wouldn't trade it for the fucking world, man. I wouldn't trade it for the world,
All right, this is my last question, and I have no idea how to make this a smooth transition at all. Because from what we're talking about to what I'm about to ask you, so I figure I'll just go for it. I was watching a few of your live performances, and I think what has always stood out to me is that, and I think I mentioned earlier, that you are having fun. Like even with the heavy stuff, it's quote unquote heavy stuff. It's just fun, and you're enjoying what you're doing. And then I've never seen you live, but then watching your performances, you really come off as like kind of a big band leader type thing, not just like an MC, but someone who, it's like years ago, early 2000s, I got to see BB King in concert, and I don't remember who opened for him, but of course, like, you know, it's a guy you don't remember, but of course he's like in the Hall of Fame somewhere.
Yes.
And he was by himself, and I was visiting. It was at Cornell, so the sound guy was probably a college kid, and in front of us, this amazing vocalist was doing sound check for the kid, like correctly, to make sure he sounded correctly, because he just he knows his voice and knows how this equipment works. Yeah. So I kind of, to me, that's kind of how you are. How did you develop this, not being just an MC, but more than an MC, you know, like a band leader and, a well-rounded artist?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. Thank you for noticing that.
Of course.
I developed into more because I wanted to be more than just an MC, you know. To me, you know, when I was coming up in the 90s, it's like you said, I mean, you know, when we talked about earlier in the conversation, you know, finding your voice, literally and figuratively. You know, I'm thinking to myself, and I continue to always think to myself, where are my strengths? Where do I stand out? You know, what can I offer that hasn't been done yet? You know, and generally, whenever I try to make a new album, or whenever I go out and rehearse a show for a new tour, you know, I take a look back at I kind of take a look back, and I take a step back, and I try to like sort of survey the landscape, you know what I mean? And I see what people aren't doing, or what I haven't done yet, or where I can improve. And I try to insert myself there. Does that make sense? So, you know, so the band was something that I just noticed nobody else was really doing, you know, except for maybe the Roots at that time, and the Black Eyed Peas, of course, and you know, there were some other artists back then that were doing it, but it was rare, you know, and I see why. I mean, it's a real undertaking, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it has led, in my opinion, to so much growth for me as an artist and as a person, because I have such a broader understanding of music now and performance, and just my vocabulary, you know, in every sense of the word, is so deep now in terms of being a consummate artist, which is always what I wanted to be, you know. And as a producer, like in the early days when it was me, Shadow, and Chief XL, you know, making beats, I mean, it was us alone in a room with a cubicle and a big stack of records and a sampler, and that was pretty much it, you know what I mean? And you know, I made Later That Day that way, and I made Same Shit Different Day that way, but after a while I started to feel like that medium was kind of limited, you know, and I didn't really feel like I could consider myself a great artist or a great producer unless I was well versed in these other mediums as well, you know, like. And that's when I decided, you know, I want to branch out. I want to work with real musicians in the studio. I want to work with other people. I don't want to just be a guy alone in a cubicle or an office space with a typewriter. You know what I mean? It was like, I didn't really feel like I could consider myself. I wasn't reaching my true potential if I wasn't branching out. You know what I mean? And so that's kind of where that came from, you know, and I saw a lot of the early dance hall artists like Shabba Ranks and Ninja Man, and, you know, who were heroes of mine. They all had bands, you know, right. And even though the music was very electronic and very, you know, it was kind of quote unquote in the box style production, as we call it now, you know what I mean? When you see them perform live, they had a band, and what they were doing was really, they had a lot of flexibility and a lot of versatility as artists, because they had this medium that allowed them to do certain things, you know. And you know, of course, my heroes also are like James Brown and Curtis Mayfield, and, you know, these guys that fronted these bands. And I wanted to bring that. I wanted to contribute that to hip hop, you know.
So, Lyrics Born, new record out with DJ Cutso, Anti, definitely must listen. Lyrics Born, thank you so much for being on Library Rap, the Hip Hop Interviews with Tim Heinecke. I know it was a long interview, but thank you so much, man.
Absolutely, man. Thank you. I appreciate it, Tim. Thank you.
I feel highly disrespected. Herd immunity ain't serving the community. No more hurting our community with certain impunity. We've been targeted as a source where this started. It's our turn to spin on the wheel of misfortune. Those in authority blame the model minority and tell their supporters we the reason for quarantine. A strategy as old as America itself. Let them fight each other. Let them bury themselves. Anti-slants, I guess who's the bad guy? I ain't playing. I'm saying. Anti-slants, I guess who's the bad guy? I ain't playing. I'm saying.
My name is Thomas Kelly, and I'm a talk show host on Salem Radio Network in Cleveland. I followed the Jussie Smollett hoax case and reached the obvious conclusion: guilty. His story didn't make much sense. The co-conspirators confessed, and a jury returned a fair verdict. Case closed. And then I heard from Shelley Stanley, a veteran independent investigative reporter. She didn't know Jussie, never heard of him, but she saw some red flags in the media coverage and dove into the case. After intense review of Chicago police records, she found startling new evidence that cast a cloud over Jussie's conviction and cries out for a fresh look at the case. That's the reason for this podcast. I was certain Jussie was guilty, but now I'm a doubting Thomas. Listen to the new evidence and witnesses. Jussie Smollett, guilty or innocent? You be the judge.
Listen on iHeartRadio, Apple, or wherever you find your favorite podcast.
TDR is the podcast that busts the echo chamber. The world is dominated by hashtags, tweets, and TikToks. This contributes to the polarization that increasingly defines our shared experience. As a culture, we don't have nuanced conversations about difficult issues anymore.
TDR attempts to bring back that conversation. Freedom of speech or freedom from misinformation. Personal autonomy or collective responsibility. And what's courageous or cringeworthy. We're diverse in thought, not just in color. Always provocative, never pejorative. Controversial, not condescending. The show is for all people, but it doesn't work for everyone. We fight it out, but always hug it out.
If discussing controversial subjects from different points of view bothers you, this isn't your show. But for the curious and open-minded, the people who know we're on a journey even if we may not know the destination, welcome to TDR. Listen to the Diversity Remix on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Just move, Christina.
This goes beyond the badge. I got carte blanche across the border, my friend. I'm a goddamn celebrity.
Wish you hadn't stopped us, cause now I gotta kill your ass.
Wait, no! Who's that, baby? Maten al resto. Kill them. Kill them all.
It's about our operations south of the border, sir.
None of these idiots in D.C. know anything about that.
One of them got out, sir.
¿Qué estás haciendo, Yadira?
You're saying that she was tortured?
She was more an experiment.
An experiment?
Failure is not an option. There may be wolves circling.
I'll see to it that the doc puts you under before he removes your brain pin.
Hurry up, sir.
Please, help me.
I've only given you a paralytic. You will enjoy every single sensation.
Mira, cabrón, no te callas o te mato.
Is anyone else feeling like a hero? I'll meet you in hell, old friend.
Listen to For Blood or Justice on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey, it's Mark Goodman.
And I'm Alan Light.
On today's podcast, Record Store Day founder Carrie Colleton is joining us to discuss the April 20th RSD special releases.
Plus, we'll talk live with our audience, the Sound Up Pod Squad, and find out who still listens to vinyl. And some updates from the Beatles universe.
Oh, good. Sound Up with Mark Goodman and Alan Light, the only music podcast that matters. Get it on Pandora, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.